It's January 14th, 2026, and I'm in Vermillion, South Dakota.
Now turn left.
Heading towards the National Music Museum. Which should just be up here, right on the left.
After a mile, you will reach your destination. The destination will be on your left.
That looks like it there on the left.
After 500 feet, you will reach your destination. The destination will be on your left.
Maybe there's no parking spaces left. Let's see. That's handicapped. 15-minute parking. Well, I'm here before they open and all the parking spaces are taken. This one will no doubt be NMM visitor parking only. I'm a visitor. The original museum building here was originally one of the Carnegie libraries donated by Andrew Carnegie to either Vermillion or the University of South Dakota here. And then this other part over here was a fairly recent addition. I have not been here since the addition was put on. And it looks like entry is primarily by the ramp now, which is a good thing. So I had said earlier that I had been waiting for the museum to fully reopen since the remodeling, and it turns out I'm a little bit premature, that the entire second floor of the building is still off limits except to people who work here. So it's first floor only at this point, and the displays will be sparser than I had anticipated, but it should still be worthwhile looking at, and it'll only get better. So there's a small performance space here. They give recitals and various ensembles and solo work, all sorts of things, but it's a nice performance space. Small, but appropriate. And that's the name of it. So we have a gamelan orchestra. I've had the privilege of playing in a gamelan orchestra at one point in the past, and it's fascinating, mesmerizing music. So I spoke with one of the curators for a little while before starting my tour here, and he'd said, at this point in time, until the rest of the building opens up, the presentations are more, they're focused differently, let's put it that way. And it's telling a different story, although, once they get things repopulated in the entire space, it'll change back somewhat to what it was before, but it'll still be considerably different. This is the Larson Founder Gallery. Arne Larson was the original curator of the museum. The museum is based around his personal instrument collection, which was vast. There's a picture of him, along with Mr. Rogers. And his son, Andre, was the curator here for a long time. Back when Arne was in charge of the museum, he called it the Shrine to Music Museum. And later on, it became the National Music Museum. Arne Larson knew he had something special, his instrument collection. Starting as a hobby, by 1964 it needed a better home. The South Dakota Public School band director wanted his instruments used for education to preserve their historical, cultural, spiritual, and humanitarian values. Universities nationwide took note, but University of South Dakota was able to land the Larson's collection here in Vermillion. Founded in 1973, the Shrine to Music is later renamed the National Music Museum, as I already said. Today it supports free concerts, draws tourists, and offers a unique Master of Music degree with a specialization in instrument history. So here we have a echo horn in G, made by C.G. Kahn in Elkhart, Indiana in 1896. And here you have an end-blown flute from Norway, made sometime in the 1970s. And this is a double flageolet, English style, made in London around 1835. This is a Greek zither. The imaginative design isn't based on a real Greek zither, but Arne Larson enjoyed his instruments for what they were, in this case, a creative interpretation of a fretless harp zither based on those used by the Oddfellows fraternal organization. Here we have a transverse flute in C. Nothing particularly special about it as far as I can tell, but it's a very common type of instrument. And there's a clog violin here, made out of a wooden shoe. And that was actually made by Arne Larson, students at his high school in Iowa. The school's marching band sports wooden shoes during the city's annual Tulip Festival, which celebrates the area's Dutch heritage. Larson took the challenge in stride and made a violin to be played with soul, S-O-L-E. Here's a couple of clarinets here, one in B flat, one in E flat. And there's a oboe d'amore, made in 2017. It's a reproduction of an antique one. And part of a double bass. And a flute in C, made out of crystal glass. Here's a trumpet in F. This was made by Adolphe Sax in Paris around 1869. Sax made a number of instruments that had more than the usual number of valves. usually as a means to achieve better intonation, although this type of thing didn't usually catch on in the long run. But you could end up with things like a separate tuning slide for a lot more notes, so you didn't have to use combinations as much. And this is a miniature virginal made in Italy around 1672. Here's a cittern made in England around 1620. And a treble viola da gamba made by John Hoskin in England in 1609. Here's a cittern made in Italy in around 1538. And a violoncello, the King, by Amati. And a choral mandolin. This actually says, and its case. I don't see the case, but it's by Stradivari, 1680. And a guitar called the Rollins, also made by Stradivari. And a Jacob Stainer violin from 1668, made in Austria. Here's a gallery on American guitars and American music in general. I should probably start and go with the numbers. A plectrum banjo by Vega. And a guitar, the Master 400 model by Stromberg. Another guitar, a Super 400 model by Gibson. Another guitar, the New Yorker model by D'Angelico. A prototype guitar by DeQuisto of New York. A guitar by Salvador Ramirez. Guitar by Martin. Guitar model D28 Dreadnought by Martin. Guitar style 03 or 03 by Gibson. Can't really get great pictures here because of the glare on the glass. A Lyre mandolin by Gibson. A mandolin style A by Gibson. Guitar style O by Gibson. A harp guitar style U by Gibson. And this big honker is a Mando bass, also by Gibson. It's a model J. Electric guitar model D35 Dreadnought by Martin. An electric guitar Les Paul Gold Top model, or Gold Top model, made by Gibson. An electric guitar, the Explorer model, by Gibson. A resonator guitar Is it Dopira Brothers? Electric guitar, the Value Leader model, 1961 thin line electric by K Musical Instruments Company. A guitar by Regal Musical Instruments of Chicago. Guitar GR Southwestern Collection Series, Lorenzo, Rick, and Robert Pimentel and Sons. Guitar, the Sean Colvin M3SC Grand Auditorium Signature Edition by Martin. And a guitar, it's a modified Dreadnought model. Sarmogel, I guess. Guitar, the Ray Whitley custom model by Gibson. Another one, another Roy Whitley Recording King model, Gibson. The Style 000-18 Orchestra model, auditorium size by Martin. An electric Hawaiian guitar, EH-150 by Gibson. This is apparently another Hawaiian electric guitar, the model A22 Frying Pan by Electro String Instrument Corporation of Los Angeles. And here we have a soprano ukulele, Style 2 by Martin. Another soprano ukulele, model D or 4 by Kumalai, something like that. Soprano ukulele, Jose do Esperanto Santo of Honolulu, soprano ukulele. This museum always seemed to be heavier on strings than on woodwinds and brass, although there was tons of that as well. Just a lot of pieces of violins and guitars here. And this is supposed to be a luthier's shop of sorts. Typical workbench that a violin maker would have used, and many of the tools. These are actual violins, though not mock-ups. That's a Guarneri Kurt Lothar Meisel, and then a Kurt Oswald Meisel violin, and a Friedrich Wilhelm Meisel, and a Carl Lewis Meisel. And the white one there is an unfinished one by Kurt Meisel. And here we have something of a mock-up of a guitar workshop. Referencing various makers. It's a little hard to figure out some of the instruments, but if you look carefully, it's usually possible to identify them with the signage. Over here on the left is a guitar, the Excel model by Angelico. The next one over is a guitar, the New Yorker model by De Quisto. The next one with the darker finish is a guitar, the Excel model by Quisto. Then the blonde one, that's a cutaway model by Gudelski. And then the right-hand one is the Antoinelle model by Gudelski and Andy Powers. Then we have a 2-point model mandolin by the Raphael Ciani Workshop of New York. And the guitar laying up on the bench is a Dakota Ultra model made by Fender. As it says, second floor galleries coming soon. This is the De Welch Knudsen Gallery. We have a drum in Tenga, Africa. In Tenga, another drum from Uganda. A banjo by Henry Dobson of New York. A bassoon, unknown maker, but made in Germany, probably in the early 20th century. And there's a little ocarina there, attributed to Max Freyer and Company of Meissen, Germany, late 19th century. A jingling Johnny, otherwise known as a Schellenbaum, also known as a Turkish crescent. Unknown maker, but almost certainly made in Markneukirchen, Germany, around 1920. These are essentially a percussion instrument, a lot of little jingly things on them, and one way to play them is to just take the entire rod that they're on and lift it up and down and kind of drop it on the floor a little bit, and makes everything on it ring and jingle. It's inspired by the instruments that the Ottoman military bands used, Janissary bands, with his traditional Turkish music, with complex rhythms and wavering pitches and unusual scale systems and all that. The Europeans tried to emulate those sounds to get the so-called Turkish effect, and that was why things like this were made in Germany. Here we have a grand piano by Anton Martin Time of Vienna, Austria. One of the pedals, there's quite a few extra pedals on this piano. Kind of hard to see, but there's a bunch. And according to the signage, one of the pedals on this piano controls bell and drum effects intended to imitate Turkish music. Now the legs on this piano, they actually represent a fairly racist stereotype common in Europe during the 1800s. The so-called black Amur is a made-up mishmash of African Muslim or Moors and Turkish Muslims, sometimes male, sometimes female. The black Amur is near naked, dark-skinned, and almost always portrayed as enslaved. This is the sounds of war, but not everything here has got much to do with war. I'll just start from the left here. Songs of Nations. There's an arched harp here. Maker unknown, but made in Myanmar or Burma around 1960. And a spike fiddle, also made in Myanmar or Burma around 1875. It closely resembles a violin, but it features a carved Myanmarese dancer in place of the classic violin scroll. And we have a fanfare trumpet, unknown maker but made in Germany. And here's a cornet, a cylinders, B flat, so it's a rotary valved cornet made by Jean Fink in Strasbourg, France in 1840 or thereabouts. And there's a cornetto in A, made in Germany around 1600. This instrument was in the collection of Albert and Nathaniel Rothschild, part of the Vienna branch of the wealthy Rothschild family known throughout Europe as devoted arts patrons. This particular cornetto was plundered by Nazi soldiers and then returned to the family in 1998 by the Austrian government. And then it made its way here. This clarinet here, right in the middle of the picture, is a clarinet in E flat by Oscar Adler and Company of Markneukirchen, Germany. And this interesting brown one, which isn't going to photograph especially well, is a Terregato in B flat by Oscar Adler and Company of Markneukirchen. It symbolizes Hungary's national identity. This Eastern European country occupies territory that has been invaded, conquered, and carved up countless times. When Hungarians used the Terregato as a signal in violent rebellions, Austrian rulers banned the instrument into near extinction. Here's a over-the-shoulder cornet, along with a picture of a militia bandmaster posing with an over-the-shoulder cornet as well. But this one here is a cornet in E flat made by Kaiser and Kohler of Cincinnati, Ohio. And this is a over-the-shoulder tuba. It's not really a tuba, it's a E flat bass over-the-shoulder sax horn. But we still like to call them tubas just because they're the lowest voice in the brass bands that used sax horn type instruments, but sax horns are really in a different branch of the brass family than tubas are, so it's not quite proper to call them tubas still. And over there is a over-the-shoulder alto horn in E flat made by Seltman of Philadelphia during the Civil War, as were the other over-the-shoulder types. If they were made in America, over-the-shoulder sax horns were almost always made during the Civil War. There wasn't much need for them before the war, and after the war they fell out of fashion very quickly. Up here's a snare drum by William Kilbourne of Albany, New York, 1858-ish. And there's a snare drum by Eli Brown of Connecticut, around 1835. And here's a bass drum also by Eli Brown. Here's a one-valve bugle in B flat, the Bersag horn, made by Rinaldi and Company of Florence, Italy. And here's a fife in B flat made by Walter Crosby of Boston, Massachusetts, sometime in the middle to late 1800s. And there's an electric guitar sitting here for reasons I'm not clear about. This was made in Vietnam. It says, guitar builder, collector, and historian Lynn Wheelwright brought this bright blue instrument at a swap meet near his Utah home. Inside he found a note identifying the man who made it. And I don't know how to pronounce Vietnamese names, but it was Vien Phuong, something like that, who worked out of Ho Chi Minh City. Almost certainly belonged to a Vietnam veteran who'd brought it home. The tenor saxophone in B flat, made by Gottlob Hermann Horler of Schöneck, Germany. And here's a serpent in C, as most of them are, made by William Lander in England around 1820-ish. Usually serpents are made from leather-covered wood, but there were some that were made of metal, and here's one. William Lander was a brazier. He specialized in making objects out of brass. So he designed household items ranging from candlesticks and teapots to furnaces and water pumps. But he also made horns, bugles, flutes, stringed instruments, and even harmonicas. This is the only surviving Lander instrument known to exist. There's an alto ocarina by Fred Gretsch of Brooklyn, New York. Is distributed during World War II by the U.S. government as an easy-to-play, as morale boosters for soldiers and goodwill tokens for civilians. It's made out of plastic. Up here's a ratchet, maker unknown, but England from sometime in the mid-20th century, so it's just a noisemaker. But they were used during the war, and certainly this one was. You could use it as a lifesaver. You could use it to signal a gas attack, or for other reasons. You just spin it around while holding the handle, and it makes a very loud racket. There's a natural trumpet in E flat by John Nichols of London, made in around 1846. And here we have a very wide but not very large diameter bass drum, maker unknown, England, from around 1714 thereabouts. And finally, a trombone, a buchin. That's that type of bell with a zoomorphic head. Otherwise, the slide is pretty conventional. The snakehead trombone was a showy part of military parades during the reign of Napoleon Bonaparte I, Emperor of France, from 1804 to 1815. Comedic entertainers throughout France used the instrument as a prop to lampoon both the military and Napoleon. Here we have a bass Antoniophone in B flat, also in A. It's a convertible instrument. And right down here is an Orpheon in E flat, using Blakely's compensating system by Boosey in London. There's a little bit of a story about the Antoniophones and the Orpheons. The Antoniophone is named for its French inventor, Antoine Courtois, while the Orpheon, made by London-based Boosey and Company, was a knockoff using a different name. The original owner of this Orpheon down here was Patrick Gilmore, a famous band director and band leader. He was enraptured by the Antoniophone. He said it possessed more of the qualities of the human voice than any other instrument ever invented. However, when he decided to buy one, he opted for the copycat version, probably because it was less expensive. Here's an arch lute made by Pietro Relich of Venice, Italy, next to a regular lute by Magnus Tiefenbrucker and Thomas Edlinger of Italy and Prague. Here's an end-blown flute, shakuhachi, from Japan. Here's a hammered dulcimer made by Di Shang Company of Canton, China, around 1900. This is a mouth organ, or sheng, made in China sometime in the mid-19th century, mid to late 19th century. It's the granddaddy of all free reeds. It inspired a whole family of European instruments, including the harmonica, symphonium, and accordion. You blow into the hole, and it has a different resonant pipe and reed for every note. And this is a mouth organ. You wouldn't know it to look at it. You'd think harmonica when you hear mouth organ. This is a Kij or Quij or something like that. It's from Laos, the Hmong people. This is made sometime in the mid-20th century. So essentially made in Southeast Asia somewhere. It doesn't say here where this particular one was made, other than possibly in Laos. Up here is a diatonic accordion and its case by Constant Bousson of Paris, France, around 1870, 1880, thereabouts. So these are all push and pull concertina type instruments. This is a concertina made by William Spate of London in the late 1800s. This is a Chemnitzer concertina Stradella model by Guerini Aldo in Italy in the mid-1900s. And there are several mouth organs up here. The top one's a symphonium made by Charles Wheatstone of London around 1829. And the middle one's a chord harmonica, A, E, and D triple Aeolina by Charles Wheatstone of London. And the bottom one is a chord harmonica, G, D, C, a Pandean Aeolina by Louis Zvalin of New York, early 1800s. And down here we have a reed organ, the Fizz harmonica by Anton Heckel of Vienna, Austria, around 1825. Cornet in B flat, the new star model by Besson, late 1800s. And the B flat cornet, the Desideratum model by Besson, late 1800s. Here's a diatonic button accordion by Gebruder Buffe, or Buffa of Germany, late 1800s. A diatonic harmonica and its case. World's Fair Concert Harmonica model by Christian Weiss, around 1892. and a snare drum by Lion Healy of Chicago, again late 1800s. This is a trumpet in B flat, also in A, by Denis Antoine Courtois of Paris. This uses Vienna valves, which are quite unusual today, although they are still made in Austria in smaller quantities. It's a primitive type of piston valve, but it still works reasonably well, which is why people still find it satisfactory in certain quarters. This is an oboe in C by Kollert and Sons of Czechoslovakia, early 1900s. Here's a cornet in B flat by Charles Missenharter of New York, around 1876. This is a cornet in E flat, C, B flat, and A 4-in-1 model by C.G. Kahn and DuPont, around 1876. So you can see it has some extra tubing and such around the valves, and with tuning bits and moving slides and doing other things, it can play in different keys as its natural pitch. Here's a baritone horn. It calls it a baritone horn here in B flat, Centennial model. Again, this is a sax horn. It's not the same as a baritone. So one thing I'll say about this museum is that even going back decades, as long as I've been coming here, there's been some anomalies in the naming of some instruments. It's almost as if Arne Larson called them by a certain name and nobody's wanted to change that since, even though we know better in many cases. They kind of perpetuate the errors. I've brought that up enough times here in the past. I'm not going to keep harping about it, but you have to take a little bit of a grain of salt with some of these. Anyway, this is a baritone pitched sax horn. It's an over-the-shoulder, but it has a forward-pointing bell instead of a rear-pointing bell like the Civil War ones would have had. And it's called the Centennial model because its maker, Henry Leonard of Philadelphia, he'd been making the over-the-shoulder, rear-facing instruments for military bands during the Civil War. And in line with the centennial year of the U.S., 1876, which was going to be hosted in his city of Philadelphia, he decided it was appropriate to come up with a special version of the over-the-shoulder horn for that centennial, which is why it's called the Centennial horn. They're also known as toilet seat tubas, toilet seat baritones. They come in different sizes. This is, again, the baritone pitched model, similar in pitch to a modern euphonium, but a much narrower bore and much lesser bell flare. I actually own two of these, but they're in the E flat bass pitch, so half an octave lower than the one here. They're pretty rare, but they're pretty cool instruments. They actually play pretty well. They look funny when players carry them because you stand with this part on the left shoulder, this on your right shoulder, and your head sticking up through that so you can plug into the mouthpiece. Toilet seat tuba, aka Centennial model. So this here is a cornopian in B flat made by John August Kohler in London around 1851. You'll notice that it has disc valves. Not pistons, not rotaries, but disc valves. There are plungers that operate the discs and rotate them. It's a kind that didn't work out that well and was pretty quickly abandoned, but they make for interesting looking instruments if nothing else. Here's a trumpet with disc valves, also by John August Kohler, 1845-ish. And here is a cornet with the Berliner type valves, which was an early type of piston valve. A lot of instruments in the Civil War period used Berliner valves, if they used piston valves at all. So this is by Adolphe Sax of Paris around 1850. And here is a cornet in C, B flat, and A, the Ultimatum vocal model by C.G. Kahn around 1884. Highly decorated, as Kahn liked to do in that period, just absolutely covered with beautiful engravings. Pretty much the entire instrument. Hard to pick it up on the video here, but you can see that it's heavily decorated. And finally, a double-belled euphonium in B-flat, the Wonder model by C.G. Kahn, made in around the 1890s, 97, 98, like that. According to Laura Gaffney, her great-great-grandfather, Fletcher Wachter, played this particular euphonium in 1904 at the opening ceremony of the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis. This display is called the Classical Orchestra, Scale, Color, and Variety. Over here we have an alto saxophone, E-flat, the Broadus Committee Handcraft model by Martin Band Instrument Company, around 1937. Up here we have a bass trombone in B-flat and F by H.W. Moning of New York. Here's a trumpet in F made by Josef Wolf in the Czech Republic sometime in the late 19th century. It uses rotary valves. Here's a trumpet in G to low B flat with its crooks. Unknown maker, but made in Austria in the 1830s. Early trumpets played just a few notes, mostly used as a blast of sound to add color. The invention of the valve in the 1800s brought about seismic changes. Trumpets could now play melodies and solos. However, the first valve trumpets still relied on crooks to change the keys, as with this instrument. And you'll notice that this instrument only has two valves, two valve paddles, and while it looks superficially like it has four valves, these are again Vienna valves, like I'd mentioned previously. So it actually has two pistons side by side that are coupled together and work in tandem. So it's really just a two-valved instrument. You definitely needed to add the crooks if you wanted to be able to play chromatically. This timpani here, unknown maker but made in France around 1890. And then finally up here we have a tuba in C by C.G. Kahn, made in the early 1900s, the first decade. Fred Geib Sr. played this custom-made tuba on many of the earliest American recordings of classical orchestras. Geib preferred rotary valves, so Kahn outfitted this tuba with them. It is one of the only handful of rotary valve instruments ever made by Kahn. Here are some more orchestral instruments. Here's a cello made by Richard Weichhold in Dresden, Germany around 1894. And a violin made by Matthias Brandstätter of Vienna, Austria around 1824. a viola by Gaspardo Bertolotti da Salo of Italy around 1562, or it could have been made as late as 1600. And the bow is a viola bow made by James Tubbs of England. The metal instrument there is an alto flute in G, a curved head joint type, made by Altus in Japan in the 1970s. So it had both the normal straight head and the curved head. The curved head reduces the length of the instrument, ideal for someone with shorter arms or fingers. Then this is a flute in G made out of wood, made by Richard Potter of England in the 1750-1770 period of time. Here's a bassoon in C by Bühler and Keller of Strasbourg, France, in the very late 1700s. And next to it's an oboe in C by Johann Ziegler of Vienna, Austria, in the 1830-1840 time period, and a clarinet in C by Bochmann of France, around 1825. Up here we have a single horn in F by Charles Sax of Belgium. This was the father of the probably more famous Adolphe Sax that we know for saxophones and things like that. This is a single horn in F by Carl Geyer of Chicago, made in the early 1900s. Here's an orchestral horn and its case with places for all the crooks. This is made by Lucien Joseph Raux, or R-A-O-U-X, however that's pronounced, of Paris around 1790. As it says on the sign here, early orchestral music limited the use of horns because they could only play in one key. In 1781, instrument maker, the same one who made this horn, and musician Karl Terschmidt expanded the instrument's capabilities with a new design, represented by the horn on display here. The horn changes keys by use of crooks, which are just curved metal tubes that insert into the instruments to alter the length of the air column. But you have to have the music written in a way that gives you time to change the crooks during rests. So this display is referencing the St. Louis Exposition. We have a cornet here. To me it looks more like a, well, I guess it is a cornet, the closer I look at it. It's in B flat A and also high pitched and low pitched. It's the Victor New Wonder model made by C.G. Kahn around 1921. So it was made before standardized pitch became widely accepted. So this horn could use high pitch, low pitch tuning standards. It's displayed here in its high pitch mode. To make it lower, a musician swaps the low pitch slides, which are conveniently stamped LP. As a bonus, the cornet can also switch between the keys of B flat and A with a quick change push rod. You can see a rod there that is linking that tuning slide with this tuning slide, done in such a way that pulling one out pushes the other one out as well. These are curved soprano saxophones. These days, soprano saxophones are usually made straight, so they're shaped like a clarinet, but they did make them and still do make them in curved shape. This one on the left is a B-flat high-pitched model, the New Wonder model made by Kahn around 1919. And the one on its right is the low-pitched model of the same instrument, also made in or around 1919. You can see just very subtle differences in the size, maybe not, But that's what those are. And this is a mellophone in F, E flat, D, C, and also high pitch, low pitch. The so-called Perfected Wonder model by C.G. Kahn, made around 1908. So according to the sign, this mellophone was made around 1908, right at the height of pitch debate, where they couldn't decide whether high pitched or low pitched was going to be the standard. So for maximum versatility, it comes equipped with a change valve and an extra slide. While the valve changes the key of the instrument between F, E flat, D, or C, the slide makes it high pitch or low pitch. So, as with most mellophones, the valves are piston type, and these look like they're Perronet type. But there's also this big rotary valve with lots of tubes going in and out. So that's your pitch change valve. This little thing here is a pitch pipe that produces the tone A. It's a typo tone made by Pierre Pinsonat in Amiens, France, around 1830. So it's just a tuning tool, and right next to it is a tuning fork pitched A by John Dagan of Chicago around 1930, but as perhaps as late as 1950. A couple of clarinets here. The one on the left is a clarinet in B flat, high pitched, the model 7C Buffet Crampon of Paris, France, around 1904. And the one on the right is a clarinet in B flat, low pitched, by Buffet Crampon. So, again, high pitched and low pitched versions of essentially the same instrument. Here is a bassoon in C with an alternate wing joint, made by Jean-Nicolas Savary-Jeune in Paris around 1823. And here we have a single flute with two alternate joints by Heinrich Grenzer of Dresden, Germany, made in the very late 1700s or perhaps into the first years of the 1800s. And finally down here we have a chest organ made by Jacob Hernelli of Poland around early 1600s. Here's a gallery on the roles instruments play in our lives, instruments of the homes. This is a dressing table piano, unknown maker but made in England around 1815, sometimes called a powder room piano. These small instruments served several functions in a lady's boudoir. It's a tiny piano built into a table, typically with numerous compartments for sewing, notions, hairdressing tools, etc. Often had custom-built mirrors, and some also had writing desks and water basins. These small pianos, having only 3 octaves, were generally used to play undemanding popular songs for personal enjoyment. And there's a lap organ up there where it's kind of hard to see, by Abraham Prescott of Massachusetts, made around 1840. Small, affordable, portable lap organs played in many early American homes. And here's a double flageolet in D, English style, by Dalmain and Company of London around 1858. So a favorite amateur musicians used for the home. One tube would play the melody, and a second toggled open to add harmonies. The simple blowpipe meant that owners didn't need to develop strong mouth muscles, called an embouchure. This is a walking stick flute here, right in the middle of the picture. Maker unknown, but early 1800s, made in England. Walking sticks and canes were fashionable amongst gentry. Multi-purpose features abounded, such as this walking stick that doubles as a flute for impromptu concert playing. And these little things right here are so-called nanny whistles, made in the United States or England around 1880. Small multi-purpose whistles were commonly used by female child care workers or nannies. Hung around the nanny's neck for ready access, its whistle got children's attention. This is a flute in C. Jabez M. Camp of Litchfield, Connecticut, around 1837. Uses a simple fingering system, suggests it was played by an amateur musician. Pitched in C, you could just read off of piano music or so on. Here's a phonograph, the model or type SM Model A by Thomas Edison, around 1910-ish. This one uses a drum or a cylinder instead of a disc. And this is a spinet by Johann Heinrich Zilbermann of Strasbourg, France, around 1785. So a spinet is a space-saving version of the harpsichord, ideal for home use in more than one way. Played with the lid open, the sound is directed straight at the player. When the lid is closed, the lid shuts off the entire sound box to produce a hushed sound ideal for practicing without disturbing others in the household. Like its larger form, the harpsichord, spinets were popular in many European countries from the 1500s through the 1700s. So this is a double action pedal harp made by Sebastian Arard of London, England, around 1831. And a square piano, Johannes Zumpe and Gabriel Buntabart of London, England, 1776. Small, inexpensive square piano was revolutionary in the 1700s. Affordable to people of modest means and playable by amateurs of modest talent, it transformed home entertainment. I've seen square pianos before, but this is one of the smaller ones I've seen. Piano in the parlor. This is an upright piano. Almost looks like an organ, doesn't it? By Clementi and Company of London, England, around 1818. So it looks like a fine mahogany secretary desk is actually a piano. Under its curved lid, resembling a roll top, is a 6-octave keyboard. Cloth-covered doors mask the soundboard and strings, plus 2 bookshelves that might have held the family's sheet music. Its domestic disguise, belied only by the 2 foot pedals, indicates this piano was designed for the home, a small footprint taking up less room than a traditional grand piano. Such an instrument as this was a cut above the common square pianos of the 1800s. Here's a small pipe organ by Josef Loser of Lüpfertsweiler, Switzerland, made around 1786. Quite a pretty instrument. And I remember this instrument. I've seen this and remembered it from every time I visited this museum. So it's a pipe organ, obviously, by Christian Dieferbach of Pennsylvania, made around 1808. It was made for the Zion Lutheran and Reformed Church of Bethel, Pennsylvania, part of the Moravian tradition of musicians in that part of the country. This display is music in Christian traditions. Here's a chime made by the Buckeye Bell Foundry of Cincinnati, Ohio, around 1858. The joyful chimes of Sanctus bells ring out from the altar during Catholic Mass. This is a cornetto, and its case, maker unknown but made in Italy around 1600. This one appears to be wood with leather wrapping. There's an alto trombone in E flat by Johann Christoph Fiebig. And here is a typical French church serpent in wood with leather wrapping and a brass bocal. Like most serpents, it's pitched in C. This was made by Baudouin in Paris around 1801. Baudouin is one of the more famous serpent makers. They made them longer than a lot of other companies and took them to a higher level of refinement before the more advanced versions that came along later to replace them, mostly upright models. But in the traditional double S-shaped church serpent, Baudouin is one of the more reputed and famous brands. Indeed, all the serpents that I play are copies of this instrument or one of his production instruments. But it looks very familiar to me because every detail of the shape is just like the ones I normally play. I'd like to have an original, but most of them are rotted out and not playable. This is called a trumpet marine or tromba marina. It's not a trumpet. It's made in Switzerland around 1750. It's also known as the nun's fiddle. These instruments were once used by nuns in convents to replace trumpets, which were traditionally played by men. Players bowed the string while lightly touching it with their other hand to create harmonic overtones. The clear trumpet-like sound is reflected in its name, tromba for trumpet. This is a shofar, an end-blown horn in the Yemenite tradition, made in Israel around 1990. It's not the ram's horn type typically used by European Jews of the Ashkenazi tradition, but rather the gracefully twisted horn of Africa's greater kudu antelope. It comes from the Yemenite tradition, that is, Jews who had once lived in Yemen. Here's another end-blown horn, the black one there. It's a shofar, also from the Ashkenazi tradition, made in Israel, again around 1990. Here's another shofar, made in Poland around 1700. And finally, this monstrosity up here is an end-blown trumpet mask, the Vung Vung, by the Binding people, Gazelle Peninsula, Papua New Guinea, made around 1975. The elaborate mask isn't considered an instrument, although its wearer can vocalize through the bamboo tube. Guess you put your head in right there, huh? I've never seen anybody play one of these or wear one. This is Native American drumming here at this little section. There's a frame drum made by Jerome Kills Small of Utica, South Dakota in 2020. And there's a rattle made by the Iroquois people somewhere in northeastern North America in the late 1800s. Now, jumping from Native Americans to Native Tibetans, we have a couple of examples of Dong Chen, end-blown trumpets. Both of them came from Tibet from the early 1900s. I own several of these, I have a couple that are just about like these, but with less of a shine on them, and some smaller ones and considerably larger ones. Not terribly useful as musical instruments, but they sure are pretty. Matter of fact, the biggest one I have, I can't open it up in my living room. No matter which way I do it, it's too big. It would be right at home up in the So this instrument here is an end-blown trumpet from Tibet, made around 1850. And it says here, making a trumpet from a human thigh bone follows the Tibetan Buddhist belief that the body is simply a vessel. After death, bodies are exposed to the elements to decompose naturally. Monks might gather thigh bones to make trumpets, or skulls to create drums that can be used to accompany the trumpets. And this is another Tibetan thigh bone trumpet. All this one has all sorts of brass work or whatever, metallic work certainly, on top of it for a more decorative appearance. And here's another end-blown trumpet, also from Tibet, also around 1850, made out of conch shell. It's actually two of them. And here's a pair of cymbals from Japan, made around 1853. This particular type was used in religious music, especially Japanese Buddhist temple use. And this is a pellet drum from Tibet, around 1850. It's a skull drum made from two human or animal skulls joined together. You can kind of see that it does look like bone. Here's a couple of shawms, also from Tibet in the late 1800s. These are always played in pairs. And here's a pair of cymbals and the case that goes with them. These are also Tibet. These are from 1700 approximately. They have a thin chiming sound, different from Western cymbals. And this is a bowl gong from Japan around 1870. This is an alpine zither, Franz Schwarzer of Washington, Missouri, around 1920. And here you have a flute in C, a handmade model made in Boston, Massachusetts around 1942 by Vern Powell. It has an unusual low B on it. And then there's another flute in C, made by the same maker around 1935, also handmade in the French tradition. And a piano accordion, the baton tone chamber model by Pancordion of Long Island, New York. Really good for polkas and waltzes. Here's a guitar, a classical model by Talmar of the Bronx, around 1960. And a diatonic harmonica, A-flat, marine band model from 1896, made by Matthias Hohner in Germany. This is a guitar, the Hummingbird model Dreadnought by Gibson. This is one that apparently belonged to June Carter Cash, one of her favorite guitars. This guitar is a model D28 Dreadnought made by the Martin Company, and is a kind that Johnny Cash was well known to play. A tenor trombone in B flat made by Yamaha around 1994. And this is a trombone bell made by Yamaha, highly decorated by top engraver Sherry Huntley. And this is a trumpet in B flat, the Bell Canto Model 54 made by Severinsen Ackright in Oakland, California. Doc Severinsen not only owned this instrument, but he collaborated on its design. Said Severinsen about it, "This is an exceptional horn that I wish I still had." Here's a vibraphone made by Musser of LaGrange, Illinois. Or was it Musser? Musser, I would think. There's an end-blown flute, Fujara, made by Pavel Smutny of Slovakia around 2003. And here's a shawm, an Otto, made in India around 1935, and another shawm, the Nagaswaram, made in India around 1935. A B-flat clarinet made by Henri Selmer, Paris, around 1963. This is one of Rosario Mazzeo's treasured custom clarinets. A violin, the Tim Blueflint Rommel from around 1963. There's an end-blown flute in G, Tim Blueflint Rommel, Bad River, Chippewa, Comanche, made in Clear Lake, Oaks, California, around 2022. So almost brand new. Here we have a clavichord by an unknown Swedish maker made around 1780. The clavichord is a whisper quiet, think finger tapping, a muted guitar sound. It's the most personal of instruments, played alone for practice or for composition or just simply for enjoyment. And here's a keyed bugle, and its case, a very nice hand-carved case. This is made by Elbridge Wright in Boston around 1858. This high-end keyed bugle was owned by two leaders of an influential colored band in Chillicothe, Iowa. Recent x-rays revealed that William Davis, leader of the Roberts Band in 1857, had his name engraved on the bell. There is no historical trace of Davis after the war. His keyed bugle, however, passed to co-band leader Thomas B. Harris, whose name is engraved on a plate covering over Davis's name. Adding names to instruments was a way to express affection for it. Baroque trumpet ensembles and other brass around the world. This is a conch shell trumpet made somewhere in the Caribbean around 1925. You blow in the end and the sound comes out there. This is a double horn in F and B flat made by Kahn around 1970. Here's a trumpet in B flat, custom shop Uncle Sam model made by Andrew Taylor of Norwich, England. This modern trumpet proves that antique instruments haven't cornered the market on symbolism. This was formerly part of the Utley collection, and he decided to have a warmer sound the way he designed it, and used motorcycle paint for the decorative artwork. There's a hunting horn from Chrétien, made in France around 1650. And here's an Alp horn. Made by Josef Stocker in Switzerland around 1993. Here's a side-blown horn, a baragumu from Kenya, made in the early 1900s. And this pretty instrument here is an end-blown trumpet, Narcinia, or something like that. Well, that's Spanish pronunciation. Narciga, but it's got the diacriticals over it, so I'm not sure how to pronounce that. This was made in India around 1900. End-blown trumpet, Nagfani from India, made in the early 1900s. Another end-blown trumpet made in northwestern Arnhem Land, Australia, around 1990. It's essentially a didgeridoo, usually made from a tree trunk that's been hollowed out by termites. Skilled musicians who play these play continuously using circular breathing techniques, breathing in through the nose and then blowing out through air stored in the cheeks that have been puffed out. And there's a side-blown trumpet from Papua New Guinea around 1950. And then a Baroque trumpet, or natural trumpet. This is made by Wolf Magnus Eya I of Nuremberg, Germany, around 1720. No valves or keys or finger holes if it's done properly, although a lot of people who play them now have ones with finger holes added to make them play easier and help to play a little more in tune. But this is the trumpet that Bach would have used and written for, and many other composers of his time. Drums are universal. Strike, clap, slap. This is a slit drum from the New Hebrides around 1900. This is a tambourine from Egypt and a barrel drum from India around 1900, a box drum from Lima, Peru, made around 2011, and a friction drum, that's this one, a friction drum, Sambumbia of Guatemala, around 1970. You don't strike this particular drum to make the sound. Instead, the player rubs a rope or stick fastened to the head to make vibrations. Friction drums likely originated in Africa, but they became identified with Guatemalan culture. Kettle drums or timpani, made in Prussia or Bavaria around 1698. Here's a frame drum from Sanya Holy Eagle, Ogala, Dakota, Indian Rapid City, South Dakota, made around 2022. And then a kettle gong from Thailand, or Siam, made around 1630. All right, departing the National Music Museum. So, I had a meeting with one of the curators, and he was telling me a lot of the things that have changed in recent memory. He did point out that the museum is not fully reconstituted yet after all the renovations and expansions. As I mentioned earlier, the entire...
Turn left and then turn left onto East Cedar Street.
The entire upper floor is still under construction and not set up for viewing. So you have the smaller displays on the ground floor, but there's a nice variety of instruments on display, and the presentation is so much better than what it was the last time I was here, where you just had instruments packed into display cases. You couldn't see them clearly. It is so much easier now to get a good look at these instruments, and fairly close up. Very few of them are really blocked from view. You can, you know, you're not that far away from them, but
turn right and then you will reach your destination.
they're, you know, almost close enough to touch unless you jump over the railing. Some of them are protected by, you know, plexiglass or something, but it's definitely a worthwhile place to visit if you love musical instruments.
Your destination.
I took my time going through the displays. It took me about 2.5 hours. So in its current incarnation, I would advise visitors to give it at least 2 hours, maybe up to 3. And if you plan to stop and read all the signs and look at each instrument. Beyond that, you probably don't need more time than that.